The twin dragons were barely the size of hounds when Darius Kellen first spotted them, huddled beneath the scorched remains of their nest. Smoke still rose from the surrounding forest, and the acrid smell of burnt scales hung in the air like a funeral shroud. The raiders had come through here hours ago, 100 strong, maybe more, leaving destruction in their wake as they always did. Darius should have kept walking. He was a mercenary, not a hero, and his contract had ended 3 systems ago. But something about the way the smaller dragon whimpered, its iridescent wings tucked protectively over its sibling, made him pause. In all his years fighting across the galaxy's frontier worlds, he'd learned one universal truth. The strong preyed on the weak, and nobody gave a damn about fairness today. He decided would be different. He approached slowly, hands raised, watching the dragon's golden eyes track his every movement. They were terrified, he realized. And they should be. Dragon hatchlings fetched obscene prices on the black market, their scales used for armor, their organs for exotic medicines, their very essence drained to power weapons that could crack planets. "Easy now," Darius murmured, his voice rough from years of shouting orders over plasma fire. "I'm not here to hurt you." The larger of the twins, he'd later learned she was called Sarah, let out a warning hiss, small wisps of smoke curling from her nostrils. Her brother Thorn trembled but stood his ground. Brave little things. Before Darius could say more, the ground trembled. Through the tree line he saw them, the raiders returning. They must have tracked the hatchlings' distress calls. 100 armored figures emerged from the smoke, their weapons gleaming with hungry intent. At their head marched Captain Vross, a Krellian whose reputation for cruelty preceded him across 7 sectors. "Well, well," Vross called out, his mandibles clicking with amusement. "A human playing guardian. How quaint. Step aside, mercenary, and we'll let you live. Those worms are worth more than you'll earn in 10 lifetimes." Darius checked his rifle's charge. 60%. Not great. His armor was already scorched from his last job, the right shoulder plate missing entirely. His provisions were low, his backup weapon was jammed, and he was outnumbered 50-1. He smiled grimly. "You know what your problem is, Vross? You think everything comes down to numbers?" The raiders laughed. The dragons pressed closer to Darius's legs. What followed would be sung about in spaceport cantinas for years to come, though most would call it exaggeration. Darius Kellen, they'd say, was just a man, scarred, tired, and past his prime. But on that day he fought like something more. He used the terrain ruthlessly. The burnt forest became a maze of choke points where numbers meant nothing. He rigged traps from his remaining charges, turning the raiders' confidence into casualties. When his rifle overheated, he switched to his blade, a monomolecular edge he'd won in a card game on Praxis Station. When that broke against Krellian chitin, he used his fists, his boots, anything he could reach. The raiders had superior firepower, but Darius had something they lacked, a reason to stand his ground. Every time he felt his muscles scream for rest, he'd glance back at the twin dragons watching from their hiding spot, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else, hope perhaps. Plasma burn seared his flesh. A raider's blade opened a gash across his ribs. Another shot melted through his left pauldron, the heat making him bite back a scream. But Darius Kellen had faced worse. He'd survived the siege of Arcturus. He'd walked away from the massacre at Helion Prime. He'd learned long ago that pain was just information, and death was just another deadline. By the time the sun set, 70 raiders lay dead or fleeing. The rest, including Vross, had decided that dragon hatchlings weren't worth dying for after all. Darius collapsed against a charred tree trunk, his entire body a tapestry of burns and cuts. The twins crept forward, their small tongues licking at his wounds. Dragon saliva, he'd later learned, had mild healing properties. "Stupid," he muttered to himself, though he was smiling. "Stupidest thing you've ever done, Kellen." Then the sky darkened, and it wasn't from clouds. Viraxis descended like a living apocalypse. The Dragonfather was enormous, his wingspan blotting out the stars. His scales the color of volcanic glass shot through with veins of molten gold. The ground cracked beneath his weight as he landed, and the very air seemed to ignite around him. Darius tried to stand, failed, tried again. He'd heard stories of dragon parents and what they did to anyone found near their young. He fumbled for a weapon he no longer had, knowing it wouldn't matter anyway. Viraxis's eyes, ancient, intelligent, and currently burning with protective fury, fixed on the human. Smoke curled from his nostrils. The temperature rose 20 degrees in an instant. Then the twins ran forward, chirping and squeaking, wrapping themselves around Darius's legs despite his protests. They looked up at their father and sang, a complex series of notes that Darius's translator couldn't parse but understood anyway. He protected us. He bled for us. He stayed. Veraxis's expression shifted. The fury didn't disappear. Dragons didn't forget or forgive easily, but it transmuted into something else: curiosity, respect, perhaps even the draconic equivalent of gratitude. The great dragon lowered his massive head until his eye was level with Darius. When he spoke, his voice resonated in the mercenary's bones. You are burned, human. Badly. My fire did not cause these wounds, yet you bear them as though you wore my wrath as armor. Darius coughed, tasted copper. The other guys looked worse. A sound rumbled from Veraxis's chest. Laughter, perhaps, or the beginning of an inferno. You stood against 100 raiders. For children not your own. For creatures you could have sold for enough wealth to retire in luxury. The dragon's eye narrowed. Why? Darius looked at the twins who were now curled against him, their breathing finally calm. He thought about all the times he'd walked away, all the innocents he'd ignored because they weren't his problem, weren't his contract, weren't his concern. Because someone had to, he said simply. And I was here. Veraxis was silent for a long moment. Then he did something that shocked Darius to his core. The dragon bowed his head, a gesture of profound respect in draconic culture. I cannot heal what my fire did not burn, Veraxis said. But I can offer something worth far more than wealth or titles. You have earned a dragon's gratitude, Darius Kellen. You have earned my friendship. And should you ever have need, from this day until the stars grow cold, you need only call and I will answer. Darius felt something warm spread through his chest, and it wasn't just from his injuries. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt like he'd done something that mattered. The burns were worth it, he said, and meant it.